Hi, this is Andy Yen from Proton, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today, we have episode 392 for September 2nd, 2024. We are already into September. That is just mind-blowing. So happy Labor Day to those of you in the U.S. who hopefully have a day off and are doing something fun. One quick news item before we start. I was interviewed 2 or 3 months ago, I think it was, on the Easy Prey podcast with Chris Parker, no relation. And it just aired, just came out last week. So I posted about it on social media, but if you missed that, there is a link in the show notes if you care to hear it. It was fun. It was a great talk. I really enjoyed it. We talked about a wide range of privacy topics, including some of my top tips for protecting your data. So if you're curious, check that out or just share it around on social media. I would appreciate that. Speaking of which, stay tuned to the end of the show. I've got another update for you on my promised crowdsourcing sort of campaign for generating more awareness for the podcast and the blog and all that sort of stuff. So I will have a note about that, which I'll talk about at the end of the show. But for now, let's set up this interview with Andy Yen, the CEO of Proton. I think this may be the 5th time he's been on the show. I've talked to Andy quite a few times. He is a really great guy to talk to. Always very straightforward. And I like getting his opinion on this stuff. He is pretty opinionated, as one might expect of somebody who's been running a privacy company for 10 years. So as you probably know, I try not to do infomercial podcasts. I don't want to focus on a company's products for the whole interview and be uncritical of them. So Proton has released a whole bunch of new products in the last couple months. Like Proton Docs, Proton Scribe, Proton Wallet. And on top of all that, they've just restructured their company as a new foundation to try to protect their mission going forward. So I had a lot of questions about Proton products today. But, there have been some concerns with some of these products and with privacy advocates, myself included, about some of these new products. For example, Proton Wallet currently only supports Bitcoin, which, despite what you may have heard, is really, honestly, the least private cryptocurrency you could probably find. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. I'm sure you could probably find worse. But as far as the popular ones go, it's really not that private, which we'll talk about today. So why did Proton go with Bitcoin and not, say, Monero? And why are there not other privacy features built in? Well, it turns out there's some actually very interesting and I think satisfying answers to those questions, and we get into that today. We also talked about adding AI to Proton's email app and probably eventually to Proton Docs because AI has privacy issues around it as well. So we talked about how they did that and how they are addressing the potential privacy problems of adding AI to their products. I even went so far as to ask him, given the recent Google monopoly ruling in court, even though that has not really settled out yet, that could be a potential death blow to Mozilla, the maker of Firefox. And so I even asked Andy, has Proton ever considered merging with them or acquiring them? We'll get the answer to that question today. And I even asked him about the recent Signal issue that got everybody all up in arms about how some of their messages are not fully encrypted locally on the machine, meaning potentially that malware could read your messages. And so I asked him about how Signal responded to that, and I asked him how Proton handles that for their desktop Proton apps. So yeah, we're going to get into some really interesting topics today. Real quick, there are a couple mild curse words today, so if that is an issue for you, there's your heads up. But I always have such a great time talking to Andy, and this one did not disappoint. So a lot of great stuff. Let's get right to our interview. Andy is the founder and CEO of Proton. He was a scientist at CERN, has a PhD in physics from Harvard University, and he has long worked to advance privacy and freedom online. Welcome back to the show, Andy.
Hi, thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure to come back and talk to you and the rest of the audience.
Well, we are glad to have you back. You guys have been really busy. It's been a veritable Proton summer. In the last few months, you've released, Proton Docs, Proton Wallet, Proton Scribe, and there may be some I missed. Let's start with, why don't you give us a brief overview of the new stuff you've released, and why would so many things happen all at the same time?
Yeah, it's not intentional. If you want to know why so many things happen at the same time, the reason is a bit stupid, but it's a delays in engineering, right? So in fact, the original plan was for these new features and services to come out over a couple quarters this year, but some things were, as usual, things were harder than we anticipated. They took a bit longer, so certain things took longer to get ready. And by pure coincidence, they all landed in July. So it was kind of a crazy month because we had, I think the first week was the documents in Proton Drive, so Proton Docs came out. Then it was the Scribe writing assistant, and then immediately after that, Proton Wallet, and this is all in the span of 3 weeks. So we're pretty exhausted around here. I think we're done with new product launches for quite some time, but we want to get everything out to the community before the end of the summer.
All right. Well, I want to ask you questions about basically all of those. And the one, honestly, personally, the one I'm most excited about is Proton Docs, because that's been one of the things that Google has had a vice grip clinch on for years that no one has really come close to replacing. I mean, I've tried them, all the ones I could find, like CryptPad and Zoho Docs and Standard Notes, which, by the way, I know you guys just merged with. But none of them really could replace Google Docs. Now, Proton Docs obviously just came out. I'm assuming it's still pretty basic, though very, very functional. But I assume you're going to be adding more features as time goes on. And I'm also going to have to hope and put you on the spot here. Are you going to do a Google Sheets or a replacement as well?
So maybe we'll start with Docs first, right? And let me give you a few thoughts on that. Docs is indeed something that we're going to be developing quite quickly. And the reason, among other things, is, at Proton, we always, dog food our own products. So now every single collaborative document within the company is, more or less, going towards converging to Proton Docs. And when you, have to suffer the pain of a missing feature yourself, day in and day out, you become highly incentivized to address it.
Right, which is why you dog food your products. Exactly.
Yes, exactly. So for sure, I believe that gap is going to be closed, and it's going to be closed, pretty quickly, because it was a clean sheet build, right? It wasn't, taking something else, forking it, changing it, and trying to make it work. We actually started. So
you didn't bring in Standard Notes, because you just recently merged with Standard Notes, so it wasn't based on that, or what was the relationship there?
Yes. So it's not like Standard Notes reskinned. It was a clean sheet build, but using a lot of the expertise that the folks from Standard Notes had, right? And obviously, if you do everything correct, it's a lot faster than if you have to make 5 mistakes and then adapt from those mistakes, over a period of time. So we definitely were able to, I think, go a lot faster than we anticipated, because we didn't have to make that many mistakes on this one compared to some other products that we've done in the past. So that's something that I'm quite excited about. It's the reason why we got it out first, because we thought it was the most important out of all of the, let's say, summer Proton launches. And that's the one that I'm spending a lot of time on working on, and I think we're going to get quite far with that. So I think, so that's the story of Docs. Sheets is let's say, completely different animal. I think the complexity of a Sheets product is probably a factor of 10 compared to what you might see in a document product. And it seems a lot, it doesn't seem that much harder, but for context, Google has been trying for more than 10 years to, dethrone or even chip away at the market share of Excel. And they have not succeeded, right? I think there are still some things that you will need Excel for, even today. So, we don't have more resources than Google, right? Although I tend to believe that we're smarter, so probably we will go, a bit faster, but that's going to be a quite difficult one. Ultimately, it's what the community wants, right? If we see everybody telling us in the next community survey that, do sheets, then, we'll bump it up. But I think we will probably want to get the Docs product a lot better, and, pretty feature complete, before we move on to Sheets. But that doesn't mean that the current Docs products is not there, right? I use it daily, and it is, for me, almost able to handle all the things I need, right? It's missing one thing. My one pet peeve, let's say, of our own Docs products is it doesn't have suggestion mode. So I cannot see, it doesn't track my changes, right? But, that is in the works, and we hope to get it out to everybody, in the next few months.
Well, I'm looking forward to having the outline on the left. for the headers.
Yeah. And actually, we're also going to have a sidebar as well, where you'll be able to see your recent documents. And I think that's going to be a game changer as well. Actually, Google doesn't have that now, so we're going to get that before Google gets it.
All right. So you say that a lot of this is community driven. I know that's true. But some of the other products you released, I'll be curious to know if your users were clamoring for these. Like, for example, Proton Scribe. That one really surprised me because for one thing, AI is just a mess when it comes to privacy. Yeah. So much of the processing is done in the cloud, and that just immediately brings up and raises all sorts of privacy issues. So what drove you to add that particular functionality? And how do you do your AI processing without compromising privacy?
Well, a lot of people think about Proton community as sort of, all the folks on Reddit, all the folks on, Twitter, X, and actually that is a big part of the community and a very important part of the community, right? But what I think many folks don't realize is there are over 50,000 companies and enterprises, including some that are, quite large international organizations who are also customers of, Proton. We still derive the vast majority of our revenue from the consumer business, and we are always a consumer business at heart. At the end of the day, I think it's a company culture thing, right? And I think the heart and soul of Proton is always for the consumers. But we can't ignore the fact that the community today also includes 50,000 businesses. And businesses, even the ones that are concerned about privacy and security, they're adopting AI. They're adopting AI because what matters to them is productivity. And I think even for privacy-focused consumers, it's something we need to consider and think about. Because if we look at the history of the web over the past 30 years, there have probably been 5 or 6 different, what I call, fork in the road moments where society had to make a choice between privacy on one hand and productivity. And I can tell you from history, at every single one of those forks, productivity has won, right? And so my perspective on this is we are, again, facing another fork in the road, between privacy and productivity. And if we force, whether it's businesses or individual consumers, to make a choice between the two of them, privacy is going to lose. So from that perspective, AI is a little bit inevitable. And my view then becomes, if AI is inevitable, then the challenge is not, how do I avoid AI? The challenge becomes, how do you do AI in a privacy-first way? Because it's coming. And you can actually, it's interesting because, we actually have a Sir Tim on Proton's board, right? On the board of our foundation. And Sir Tim invented kind of the web, right? If you go back to the web is actually bad for privacy, right? The web created all sorts of things that, weren't possible back, before the web, right? So the web, bad for privacy for sure, but inevitable. And AI might be sort of the same. So with Scribe, what we wanted to do was, AI today is monopolized by, there's obviously Google and Microsoft, there's OpenAI, which is basically Microsoft in disguise, right? There's Meta getting involved. Apple's not there, but I guess they're trying to get there, right? And so it's the usual suspects of the worst privacy companies in the world who are controlling AI, which is the future of productivity and maybe even the future of the web in some sense, right? And a lot of people have said, Proton shouldn't touch AI at all because it's bad for privacy. And I agree. It's bad for privacy like the web is bad for privacy, right? But I think it's a tragedy if we allow sort of the next decade to pass and allow the next revolution of let's say, the digital revolution that's happening for the past 30 years to be completely monopolized by players that we know don't give a shit about privacy and are there to basically ruin our lives online, right? And ruin democracy and freedom. Proton's not big, but what we're trying to do with Scribe is to have a seat at that table and to create an environment where the consumer doesn't have to make that hard choice between privacy and, productivity, and they build technology in a way that they can, credibly and potentially have both. And one of the things that, we did that was quite different here was doing local AI. So on Scribe, you can actually run it completely on your device, right? Nothing, gets sent to Proton. And that allows you to have data sovereignty while still being able to benefit from AI. We also did it, I think, quite differently. We don't train on your prompts. We don't have access to your data, so it's not using your data to do anything. It's not logging any prompts if you decide to send queries, to the server. And it's optional. We're not trying to shove AI down your throat. It's not even on by default. But if you want it, you can use it. And for now, it's limited just to business users. But actually, what's interesting is from the community, now that a lot of people on the consumer side are now asking, please, give us access to this as well. We also want to try. We also want to use it, right? So, we'll have to make a decision about that to see what we do with it. But ultimately, as a company that is working for the community, what the community wants is what the community is going to get, right? So, we're listening to the input and we'll see how we go from there. But that's, I think, the explanation for why I think it's important for even companies like Proton to, do a bit with AI and to be involved there. Because in some ways, I think it's here, it's coming, whether we like it or not.
You say the AI is not on by default. When I turn it on, is local device processing the default or is cloud-based processing the default?
Well, you're forced to choose. So you have to make a choice.
Okay.
And basically you can choose either one. And based off of that, that's a choice that we will respect and stick with. And you're able to switch if you want later. So, it's not a permanent choice.
Okay. And are you guys rolling your own somehow? Or are you basing this off of some other AI and training model?
Yeah. So, we use, the open source, models are out there. Now people say, look, OpenAI has open its name, but it's not open source, right? So it's not OpenAI.
Yeah, right.
It's actually based off of Mistral, which is, the European, we'll say, contender in the space. And the models are, the code is open source, right? It runs locally on your machines. So that's all open. The models, of course, it's not our model fundamentally. It's a model that, was trained by, Mistral in this case. But, it's about, let's say, as open as you can get with AI, in 2024.
Okay. All right. So the one I think that really shocked me and the one that shocked a lot of my peers the most was Proton Wallet. I don't think anybody had that on their bingo card. So, first, could you briefly explain, just for my audience's sake, what a cryptocurrency wallet even is? Why do we need one? How does that function? And then why did you guys decide to release one? Yeah.
Well, a wallet for crypto is actually exactly as you think about it, right? You have a wallet, a physical wallet, that today probably holds, bills. You probably have dollars. I have Swiss francs, right? And so a wallet is a place where you, in theory, will safely store your money. And, so Proton Wallet is the place where you can safely store your Bitcoin. And why Proton wallets? It's an interesting question. And it probably wasn't on people's bingo cards, but it's been on my bingo card for the last 10 years. I can tell you that. And the reason for this is people don't remember anymore because it's been a decade, right? But actually, it was in the summer, exactly 10 years ago, and actually it ended in August of 2014. We ran a crowdfunding campaign. So Proton doesn't have VC investors. It's not backed by Silicon Valley, right? It's backed by you and me. It's backed by people. So we got our start by having 10,000 people donate €500,000 to really launch the product and get things going. And that was really the beginning of the journey. And this is why I say Proton is always community first and for the people, because the only reason that we exist is because the community supported us. And that's a debt of gratitude that, we're never going to forget and is always part of Proton's DNA because we remember that. We remember our beginnings. And I think, those roots are important to us. Now, what people don't maybe remember anymore or have forgotten is that crowdfunding campaign, it almost didn't succeed. It, in fact, could have been the end in 2014 because halfway through the campaign, PayPal decided to lock our funds. So, and our PayPal, of course, eventually released those funds, but had PayPal not released those funds and kept them locked, and the reason for the lock at that point was, they weren't sure if encryption was legal, right? Clearly is, but, some people wonder this, right? So it was kind of, at that point, maybe the third or fourth month of Proton's existence. and we had what I call a near-death experience, where we could have it could have been over, right? And I think events like that, traumatic events, they tend to stay in your memory. You kind of remember about that, right? And I remember thinking to myself, I never want to be in this position again, right? And I never want our community to be in this position again. And I actually don't think that Proton can succeed in its overall mission of privacy, freedom, and democracy if we continue to have single points of failure that can take down the entire business. And those exist today, right? We still use PayPal, we still use Visa, MasterCard, we still use credit cards to accept payments. It's frankly quite bad for the resilience of the business, considering that all of those payment providers that the world relies on, they're all American companies, right, under the control of the U.S. government. So I've always viewed being able to move to a decentralized, I'll say, payment systems and forms of money that is not controlled by any one government as essential for reducing business risk. And it is a necessary step to make Proton more resilient. So the best way that we can ensure, Proton has no single points of failures and is going to be here not just for the next 10 years, but maybe for the next 100 years or more to carry out our mission is to give to our community of, today over 100 million people, the means to pay, not just us, but anybody they want, and the means to control their money without any centralized control. And that is what we're trying to do with Proton Wallet.
Okay, so there exists plenty of wallets now, and I'd like to briefly talk about what it means to be custodial versus non-custodial, because I think that's important, and I think I know where you guys went with that, but I'd like to hear it from you. But there's already a lot of them out there. I mean, you could have just said, okay, we're going to just take Bitcoin for payment. Why was it necessary for you to have your own wallet? And who's the target audience for your wallet? Because there already are, if people are already into Bitcoin, they probably already have wallets. Yeah. What's your reasoning, kind of cart and horse there?
Well, the most common wallets today that people are using are probably the quote unquote wallet that exists on the centralized exchanges where they're obtaining their Bitcoin, right? And it's today it might be your Binance and a Coinbase wallet, but not so long ago it was probably your FTX wallet, right? And that didn't go so well for a lot of people. Right. And maybe before that it was your Mt. Gox wallet, right, or any of the other dozens of wallets. So we really looked at the two main barriers to adoption of Bitcoin in the mainstream, and there's two issues. Number one, it's a question of trust and safety. If you put money in a bank in the U.S., for example, your money, at least up to $250,000 is, FDIC insured, right? In crypto, there's no protection. FTX proved very clearly there is no protection. So most reasonable and sane people are a bit afraid to enter this space, right? This is, I think, number one. Number two, it's extremely complicated and difficult to use. It's my grandmother or even my mother probably couldn't figure it out, right? Just imagine I wanted to send you Bitcoin today, right? I have to, in some out-of-band way, obtain your Bitcoin address, right? And then I have to somehow manually verify that. I have to trust that it was you, in fact, that responded to me when I, asked you for the address. I have to input that manually into my system, and then I have to send you the coins, right? And then if I want to preserve privacy going forward, and I send money to somebody else, or you receive money from somebody else, then it has to be a different address than the one that you just gave me, right? Which you have to keep track of, but you can't keep track of because it's a random string of hexadecimal characters. It's a disaster user experience in many ways. And so for these two reasons, I think Bitcoin doesn't really work to go out into the mainstream. And these are problems that actually most of the wallets out there, don't solve, right? Some of them solve the usability problem because actually it's pretty easy to send between Binance accounts, for example. But if Binance gets hacked, your coins are lost, right? Others, are very good at the security problem because they're non-custodial, and I can explain what that is in a bit. But they don't solve the usability problem because they're non-custodial, right? So we went into the space because Proton, being actually an email company, is relatively uniquely positioned to actually be the first company that can tackle both problems. So, this is why we did it.
Yeah, so tell me about custodial versus non-custodial. What does that mean? What are the implications of that?
Yeah. Well, custodial is a bit like a bank. It's your money, but the bank is holding it for you. So if somebody robs the bank, then your money is gone, right? Now, in the typical, let's say, fiat world of dollars, if someone robs the bank, the government will backstop that because the government can print more money to kind of make you whole, right? But then, yes, you're kind of getting made whole by the government, but the government is constantly printing money. So you're actually constantly being, inflated and depreciated out of your, money, right? In absolute terms. So that's the custodial system. And actually, there's also custodial, Bitcoin wallets where, they're holding your Bitcoins for you. And this is FTX. And we saw how good of a job they did at holding your, a Bitcoin, right? So there's a saying in Bitcoin, which is not your keys, not your coins, right? And by keys here, they actually mean encryption keys. So what a non-custodial wallet is doing, or another word for non-custodial is actually self-custody, is you're always in control of your keys. Your keys belong to you. And Proton Wallet is what we call non-custodial or self-custodial. So what is the power of that in practical terms? Well, number one, because we don't actually have your keys, we don't have your coins. So nobody can come and hack Proton and steal your coins, because I don't have a database somewhere, a vault somewhere where all your coins are lying, right? I don't have access to your encryption keys. So one, it's additional security, because a hack like a Mt. Gox, doesn't lead you to lose your Bitcoins. Because I don't hold your coins, I can't go and buy, fancy condos in the Bahamas, right? Like a certain character did a few years ago, and lose all your funds because I don't have access to them. But what I think is maybe the most powerful part of this is Proton could tomorrow disappear off the face of the earth. And as long as you have saved your recovery seed phrase, your funds are still safe. And that's, I think, an incredibly powerful concept, right? Because it means that there is no centralized authority anywhere in the world that can actually, take your funds. And I heard an interesting story the other day, which I'm going to share with you and all of your listeners, right? There was an NGO in Afghanistan which had decided to, in fact, pay their staff in Bitcoin.
Okay.
So instead of transferring money to an Afghani bank account, they transferred money, and this is mostly women staff, right, to Bitcoin wallets. Then we all know the story with Afghanistan. There was a fall of, Kabul, Taliban took over, and suddenly it wasn't good to be a female aid worker, especially an Afghani female aid worker who was working for the Westerners, right? At that point, your life was in danger. So these people, they fled. They fled across the border to leave the country. And they fled with nothing. Just the clothes that they were wearing. That was all they had. But they had something else. They remembered the 12-word seed phrase for their Bitcoin wallets. So even though they left with just a cloth on their back, they also left with their entire life savings. Unlike the other one that had deposited money into, Afghan banks, right? So again, it's an example of, the power of Bitcoin in promoting, freedom around the world, right? And I think this is why self-custody is so important. This is why we build things in a self-custody way.
All right. Well, I've got to ask, Bitcoin is the one that you currently support, and that you may be supporting more in the future. But I mean, Bitcoin is arguably one of the worst cryptocurrencies for privacy. And you guys are a privacy company. So, well, first of all, do you plan to support other types that offer more privacy? And second, maybe do you also have plans to, introduce some sort of a mixer or something that would add a layer of privacy on top of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that by telling you a bit about what we are doing with Bitcoin, and then I can go into kind of the why Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin does have privacy issues, And Proton Wallet was designed with that in mind to mitigate some of that, right? Now, one of the features that we have, so I talked about the custody, this is the security element, right? But there's also the usability element. And the usability element is how can I make it easy for people to transfer Bitcoin between each other? And there's a really big privacy problem because let's say, you have a Bitcoin address and you give it to me and maybe you post it on your, on your Twitter because you want to get donations, you want to get support, right? Well, if I send you Bitcoin to that address and then someone else also donates, because it's a public blockchain, I can see two things. I see everybody who donated to you, who, okay, for your podcast is probably okay, but let's say you were a human rights organization working in Afghanistan.
It's more than okay. It's very okay.
Right. Maybe it's a problem depending on what you're doing, right? So I've seen now everybody who donated to you, but even worse, I've also seen how much you have received, right? Which is a big privacy problem. And this is because Bitcoin's blockchain is public and that's just how it works. So we approach that problem by, creating something that we call, Bitcoin via email. So if you want to receive Bitcoin in the future, and you're a Proton Wallet user, all you have to share actually is not your, Bitcoin address. It's actually your email. And this is great because I just need to enter your email and I can send you Bitcoin. Now, if someone else sends you Bitcoin, Proton Wallet will automatically make sure that transaction happens at a different address. So it makes it a lot harder to, tie all your stuff together because we are automatically rotating addresses within your wallet. So now you can actually receive the money, from 1,000 different people, for example, and have each of those come to separate addresses automatically without you having to do any work, right? Now, what is also interesting about that is if you wanted to previously achieve that, privacy, you'd have to change the Bitcoin address that you put on your, Twitter every single time, right? And if someone was sitting there watching your Twitter as you change all of that, they can still get all your addresses. So I think this is why it works better and it's quite powerful. And it's making Bitcoin privacy a little bit more accessible. It's not completely private because Bitcoin is never going to be that, but it's one way to close that gap. Now, the interesting, I think, additional power for this is today, Proton's ecosystem has 100 million accounts. And there are probably only 500 million people that use crypto globally. So because we're able to give a Bitcoin wallet to every single one of our 100 million accounts, we have potentially increased the, addressable pool of people who can use Bitcoin by 20% overnight, right? If we were to launch this feature. And I think this is really great because you don't need to understand, keys. You don't need to understand, how the wallets work, how to understand all this Bitcoin stuff. If you have a Proton account, you can be automatically enabled into this new ecosystem, into this new network. You could be using Proton VPN in Venezuela because, you want to get access to information and you're now Bitcoin enabled. So I think that's also the other power as well. And the bigger the network gets, actually the more valuable it becomes, right? Because if you have all your friends on Proton, then all of them can do Bitcoin via email. So this is why, this is how we solve the usability problem. And this is also the extension to addressing, privacy. But let's go a bit deeper, let's say, into Bitcoin privacy, because Bitcoin privacy, I think, is a big topic, right? So I think I'll talk about what we did, and then maybe I'll answer the question of, why Bitcoin anyways, right? We have a lot of people in our community, and, we're always under the public eye, let's say. And some people actually noticed, within our GitHub, because, Proton Wallet is open source, like many other things. And they noticed that actually we had originally intended to support, CoinJoin, within Proton Wallet. And CoinJoin is, it's a way of mixing Bitcoin. So basically, if you take Bitcoin from many people, you pull them together, you mix it, and you send it back out, you break the link between, recipient and sender, right? So, and what actually happened was in the process of developing Proton Wallet, the U.S. Department of Justice, basically under the Biden administration, actually they launched earlier this year a crackdown on certain Bitcoin privacy tools. So they have indicted now the 2 or 3, biggest people that were providing this type of, Bitcoin mixing service. And some of them actually are in jail now, awaiting a trial. And I think it's it's obviously very bad for privacy. And I think it's not clear at all that the law is being broken here. So I believe that, the legal question is not yet settled. And there's going to be court cases in, the next 6, 12 months and beyond, which will let us understand, the legal status of, Bitcoin mixing. But because of that environment change, it's not really a risk that, Proton can take, right? We're all for defending freedom and privacy, but, being under a US DOJ indictment, it's not gonna, let's say, help the cause as much as some people might think. So we had to make a choice, which is, do we ship Proton Wallet anyways without this feature, or do we cancel it? And in the end, we decided to release it anyways, because the legal environment could very well change in the future, right? It's actually, depending on who gets elected in November in the U.S., it could change quite dramatically, quite quickly. And as we know, Republicans and Democrats have a very different, very different attitudes towards crypto. So we launched it, and we're going to wait it out, and we're going to see what happens. And obviously, we're going to do what we can to support, the defense on these 3 cases that are ongoing, to see if we can get a precedent that would, allow financial privacy to actually exist again in the U.S. So that's kind of the, kind of our view there. And yeah, I guess I haven't answered your question about why Bitcoin. So now maybe I'll finally, answer this one. It's actually probably the hardest question. Maybe that's why I saved it for last, right? And it was really kind of mystery for a lot of people in the community, because they said, Proton's a privacy company. Why the hell are you doing Bitcoin? Bitcoin is, it's pseudo-anonymous. It's not anonymous.
Right.
There's much better ways to have private, digital money out there. And again, I think I will draw on history, in Proton history. Go back to 2014. And again, at that point, I was still a particle physicist working at CERN, right? If you were to tell 2014 version of me and pose me the question of, build me the most secure communication service that is possible, actually, I wouldn't have built Proton Mail, right? I wouldn't have even touched email in the first place. I would have built something like Signal, in fact, because why? Email is so outdated, right? It's built on SMTP, which was standardized in the 1930s, before the web even existed, before they even thought about security and surveillance and all these other issues, right? That the web would eventually bring. Email predates all of that. It wasn't designed for that. In fact, it's quite frankly not a very, very good tool for privacy.
Right.
And this is why they acknowledge. But what did email have going for it? Email, in many ways, is actually the most successful communication service ever devised in human history. Everybody's got it, everybody needs it, and everybody uses it. And why is that? It has 2 very unique qualities. Number 1, it's decentralized, and which means that no one controls it. And number 2, it's federated. And that means that I don't need to get, permission from somebody to do email, right? As long as I follow the protocol, I can write my own server and I can talk to anybody else on the network. So this open, federated, and decentralized nature made it extremely successful. And it also made it extremely resilient. This is why, despite the demise of email being predicted since the early 90s, it's still here today. And I'm willing to bet it will still be here, 30 years from now, right? Probably even longer than that. So that's sort of the lens in which I look at Bitcoin as well. Bitcoin, for sure, if you told me to build the most, private digital money, I wouldn't build Bitcoin today. I would probably build Monero, right? Or something like that. Maybe even Zcash, right? But Bitcoin has a network. It's got, the biggest installed base. It's got the sufficient decentralization. It has a network effect, just like email has. So if I want to improve the state of, private money, just like I want to improve the state of private communications 10 years ago, well, the best way to do private communication 10 years ago wasn't to build a new network that would really struggle to get the same critical mass of the existing network and probably not succeed in doing that, right? The best way 10 years ago was to take the most successful and largest existing network and make it more private.
Okay.
And with Proton Wallet, in our choice of Bitcoin, we're doing the exact same thing, except now it's digital money instead of secure communications.
So, okay, given that, do you foresee the adding support for other coins like Monero, Zcash in the future, or is that just not a priority at this point?
Well, we get a lot of flack at Proton for, starting too many things and not doing them well enough, et cetera, right? So I think in terms of privacy benefits that we can still do on Bitcoin, there's a very, very long list, right? So this is kind of like asking me, is Proton going to build a chat application? And my answer would be, well, I want to get the email, done well first before I move on to other things, right? So I think it's the same thing. I think we want to be really good at Bitcoin, get the privacy there as high as we can, and then and who knows, right? I think in the end, the community decides. So, if someday Monero becomes the biggest network, it becomes the thing that everybody is using, and it overtakes, Bitcoin as a dominant network of digital money, then for sure we're going to go there as well, right? And for sure we won't have a choice because the community is going to demand it. But again, it's about, focusing limited resources on the areas where we can have the highest impact.
Okay, well, one of the biggest surprises this summer was not a product, and it perhaps is the most foundational, to use a pun, change that you could make to Proton. That was your business structure. And you created something called the Proton Foundation, which I guess, I'd never really examined closely how you had yourself set up, but this was a conscious decision that you guys made to ensure Proton's privacy, going forward. And it's a big difference. So explain to me the thinking behind Proton Foundation as a business model, and maybe compare that, because there are other companies that do this, Signal and Nord and Mozilla, Tuda. There's a lot of companies out there that do privacy stuff. But like if they get bought out by somebody who doesn't share those values, or if they have to go public and now they're subject to, shareholders saying you got to monetize people's data, there's the business model you choose is extremely important when it comes to privacy. So tell me about Proton Foundation and why you went that way.
Yeah. Well, this year, Proton turned 10. And 10 in the tech world, it's actually quite a milestone, right? It means you're a bit of a dinosaur, because 10 years is a long time in tech. But unlike the dinosaurs, you didn't go extinct, right? It's also a sign of, I think, resilience and staying power. And it was also nice because when we started in 2014, a lot of the commentary was, I'm afraid to switch emails because these guys are a startup. It won't be around in 10 years, right? And I can now tell them, we've been around for 10 years and we made it, right? And obviously, of course, there's more challenges coming ahead, so our work is not done, and it actually only gets harder from here on out. But it does sort of raise the question, how do we ensure and secure the future? And if you look at the privacy space, there's been some things have gone on, right? There was a private search engine called, Neva that went down, right? There's a few other privacy companies that just kind of went belly up and disappeared, or got quote unquote acquired, and things like that can happen. So it was a valid question that folks in the community actually were raising, and actually it wasn't just because they were raising it. I was asking it myself as well, because it's a valid question, and the control of a company is tied up in the shareholders. And the shareholders are typically individuals. And Proton was really adhering to its mission because of the goodwill of certain individuals, myself and other early employees. And that's actually a pretty fragile system. I'm not that old yet, but people die all the time, right? It happens. And these things can happen. So the best way actually to ensure the company in the long run will adhere to its mission and its principles in an unwavering way is actually to find something that is not tied to an individual that can be legally bound to perpetuate the values for all eternity. And that's what a foundation is. A foundation doesn't have shareholders. What a foundation has is a legally binding mission and statutes, which it is obliged to follow forever. So what we did is, we moved shares from individuals into a foundation structure irrevocably, so that the foundation today is the largest shareholder, is a primary shareholder of Proton, and it also has voting control over Proton. And that means that, nobody can come and buy out the company in the future. Nobody can, take it over. It is secured forever. And what I think I like about the structure is it also commits the future financial success of Proton to the public good. Because the main shareholder that is going to benefit from Proton's success is actually a nonprofit whose sole purpose is to defend privacy, freedom, and democracy online. And that is really, I think, Proton coming full circle. Because when we launched our crowdfunding campaign 10 years ago, that was what we said that we were going to go out and do. And now we've done it for 10 years. And the foundation, what it really does is ensures that for the next 100 years, we can do the same thing. And I think we owe it to our community, to our users, and to all those that have supported us, the past decade. We owe them this assurance. Because if we don't do this, then, how can we be deserving of their continued support, right? If we're not able to, do this to ensure that their support is not misplaced. So that's why I think, we did it. And yes, it is quite different. I think you mentioned a few examples. You mentioned, Signal, you mentioned Mozilla. I can go into that, but yeah, it is very unique, but this is ultimately why we did it.
I've seen this go awry, and I'm curious if you've found a way to protect yourself against this. But like Mozilla, I believe, does this, and I think OpenAI did this as well. They have this weird public for-profit part and the private not-for-profit part, and they have these weird arrangements. I guess what I'm saying is that financial wizards find weird ways around things like this. How did you manage? Do you believe that you've managed to circumvent that?
I think we can look at. I think you mentioned Mozilla. You mentioned. I think ultimately the difference is what is at the core of the foundation. And I'll give you a couple examples, right? Let's take a Wikipedia. That's a foundation that, exists based off of donations and, goodwill, right? And I would say Signal and a couple others, and Tor, all fall in the bucket, right? Tor is a bit different. Tor, at its heart, it's government subsidized, right?
Right.
Mozilla is a Google subsidized, right? We hate to admit it, but it's true, right? If all the money comes from Google, you're Google subsidized. And OpenAI, actually, it's Microsoft subsidized. If all your infrastructure and all your money, all your funding is coming from Microsoft, you're basically Microsoft. So you see with all these foundation structures that maybe failed in the past, they were sort of dependent on a third party that they didn't really have control over. In fact, this third party had control over them, right? Because they control their budgets. And I think Proton is unique because at the core of our foundation is a self-sufficient, profitable company. We're not relying on Google to, fund us through, search defaults. We don't require infrastructure from Microsoft to run. We have our own data centers, our own facilities. We're not looking for handouts and donations. We don't need government grants and subsidies to survive. We have millions of paying customers that are willing to pay Proton for the services and the promises that, we give. And that independence and that profitable core is what makes it different. And I think, and I hope, less susceptible to outside influence in the years to come.
So you just mentioned the Google Mozilla relationship, and Google was just found to be a monopoly by, I think, one of the federal courts, and this will obviously still be tied up in litigation for years.
And also that's ridiculous, right? Like, do you really need 4 years in court to figure out that Google is a monopoly? And do you need another 10 years of appeals to confirm that? It's insane, right? I mean, obviously, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, and as you alluded to, both Apple and Mozilla make a lot of money based on Google being their default search engine. It's rumored that I think Apple gets maybe $20 billion a year or something from Google, and I think Mozilla gets several hundred million, I think, which is I think someone said it was like 90% of their revenue. Yeah. So, are we worried at all about this? Like, if they are found, well, even if they're not found, as part of this litigation, because that was one of the things that was called out in this litigation were these sweetheart deals that Google was getting to be the default. So I'm worried personally about Mozilla because Chromium is behind so many web browsers, and Mozilla is one of the last few independent browsers there are. So have you ever considered merging with or acquiring Mozilla? Or their browser is open source. You ever thought making a Proton browser from the Firefox source?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the antitrust case could have implications, right? If Google is no longer allowed to pay for search defaults, well then basically Mozilla is dead, right? Now, but then on the other hand, if Mozilla is dead, you've just given Google another monopoly on search, right? But no, not search, on browsers, right? Which actually is search at the end of the day. But then on the other hand, well, isn't Mozilla's market share only 3%? So does it
sadly?
So does it materially change the situation, right? Who knows? And I think this is probably the catch-22 here, right? With the whole Mozilla Google situation is that on the one hand, this antitrust ruling should or could potentially outlaw these type of deals. Mm-hmm. And in that case, Mozilla is in trouble. But Google is also incentivized to pay Mozilla because that's how they get themselves out of trouble on browser monopoly cases, right? So it's fundamentally, I think, a very fragile, very tenuous, and relatively risky setup, for Mozilla. So I would hate to be in that situation. I'm going to say something that maybe is a little bit controversial, right? But if you look at the browser market, in many ways, I think Chromium and so the Chrome engine, I feel it's already won and it's kind of already game over. Right? Edge is building on it, Brave is building on it. As much as I personally dislike that, I just don't see many ways in which that trend realistically reverses in the next 5-10 years, because you need essentially, a small fortune to kind of, reverse that. So it's a tough one. It's an extremely tough one to be in, right? And it's unfortunate. It's frankly unfortunate, but it's just the way kind of it is. And can Proton fix that problem? I think today we can't. Unfortunately, we can't, right? Maybe someday, we will be in a position to do that, but it's very, very difficult. So if you would tell me to, if you told me, Andy, you have a homework assignment, go out and build a Proton browser, I'm not sure that actually I would fork Firefox to do that, right? For compatibility reasons and other reasons, it might actually be easier to fork Chromium, strip out all the Google bits, and make that work. Right?
Like Brave did.
Like a Brave did, which was obviously very complicated and had many issues of its own, right? But it's not completely clear that forking Firefox is the way to go, unfortunately. So I don't know if that answers your question now, right? But I think to the question of whether we might acquire or merge things of that nature, all of us in this space, we are trying to compete against really massive giants that have way more resources, and yet we are split up over dozens of companies in dozens of countries, right? From a logical standpoint, that doesn't make any sense at all. If you're trying to take on a giant incumbent that has already consolidated itself into one giant behemoth, you actually probably want to join forces in taking on that much bigger target. So, from a logical perspective, consolidation in the privacy space it makes a lot of sense, and it may even be inevitable, but I think it's a very difficult thing to do because what are you buying, right? You're either buying technology, users, team members, or revenue. And all these businesses are so different. And the culture is also so different. And culture is actually the reason why, most mergers and acquisitions tend to fail. So even though there's a very strong logic in consolidating the entire space and going after the big guy, I think for practical purposes, it's probably not going to happen.
Well, a couple quick counterpoints to that. I will say that Internet Explorer was the de facto winner for somebody that never thought that could not be replaced. And an antitrust suit was what brought them down, allowed Google to take over. Mm-hmm. And two, you, of all the companies I've seen, have somehow managed to get people to pay for your product and have people subscribing to it actually willing to pay money for email, which, they don't have to. Whereas Firefox, for whatever reason, has decided, looks like they're going to go into advertising maybe, sadly, sort of try to do some private advertising. So it can be done.
Yes. But I might say it's a bit of a different situation, right? And why is the Internet Explorer analogy a bit different? When Internet Explorer got displaced, mobile didn't exist. So Google's hold and Apple's hold, because they control the only two mobile operating systems, very, very tightly, is a lot tighter than Microsoft's ever was, back in the 90s. People don't realize this, but that's actually a huge difference, because today most of the, let's say, browsing happens actually on mobile. Mobile is actually more dominant than desktop. So there's no comparison to desktop, and Windows, for all its faults, is way more open than Android or iOS has ever been, right? It's not a direct comparison, I think, number one. And number two, Internet Explorer, the product was objectively worse in every single way, right? And the thing with Chrome and Chromium is it's actually not a bad product. It's, in fact, in many ways, a great product, from engineering standpoint, right? And that makes it much harder to displace, because better product will generally win. And so you only not only do you have to break the mobile monopoly that you kind of have today, or it's not a monopoly, it's a duopoly, right? You need to break the mobile duopoly on one hand, and you also need to build a better product. And that's what makes it, I think, very, very daunting.
All right. So a couple other questions for you before we go. One is the TunnelVision thing broke, a few months ago, and really kind of exposed the shortcomings of VPN as a technology. VPNs really were not meant to do what they really weren't, even though private is in the name, they really weren't meant for privacy. They were meant to securely connect your computer to like your company's computer, and so that the data between the two was private, and you could get on a network remotely. So is there a better solution to this problem? I know that Proton has a VPN. I use your VPN. Is there a different solution that we should be looking at? Like, I know Tor, it's very slow, but it's got its benefits. Apple's private relay is kind of like a Tor Lite that's faster, which is, I think, interesting. And then Safing's SPN, where every different app has its own connection, is very interesting too. Are you guys looking at expanding your VPN or coming up with a VPN-like solution that really does what everyone thinks a VPN should be doing?
It's interesting you brought up TunnelVision. I actually think TunnelVision didn't show that, VPNs were effective or broken. Because in fact, if you look at Proton VPN, it wasn't impacted by TunnelVision, right? What TunnelVision proved was not that VPNs, are obsolete. What TunnelVision proved is something maybe a bit more obvious, which is if you suck at security and you don't know how to build secure software, you're going to have insecure software, right? So, TunnelVision popped everybody that wasn't doing their job properly. But if you did your job properly, TunnelVision didn't impact you. And that was definitely the case for Proton. But yeah, security is very difficult, especially when it comes to VPN space, because a lot of things can go wrong. Now, I'll give you you brought up Apple. I'll give you an example. Apple actually has a VPN leak built within their iOS stack. Actually, we were the ones that discovered the bug maybe 4 or 5 years ago and reported it to them. And it's still not fixed today because it's not a priority for them, right? So even if you use a more decentralized VPN, as long as that Apple bug exists, you're gonna have this issue. And this goes back to sort of platform control, as we mentioned earlier. Are there better ways to do VPN? I think it depends on your threat model and what you need VPN for. I would argue that for most people, Proton VPN probably is not substantially less private than Tor, because we have no logs. We cannot be compelled under current Swiss law to provide logs. We have, a long track record of not providing logs on VPN. So in that case, you still have sort of the basic anonymity that you're looking for, right? Now, there are certain threat models where actually that would not be the case, right? Maybe one of your threat models is perhaps I can't trust Proton because Proton could be compromised. It's a non-profit foundation, but maybe still compromised somehow, right? That could be your threat model. Maybe your other threat model is, there is a highly sophisticated state-backed actor that has managed to, install network equipment at my ISP and also at Proton's ISP, and is correlating traffic, between both POPs, right? Now, of course, you can use Proton's VPN secure core functionality to make that a little bit less likely, right? Which is basically like a multi-hop VPN. So there are some mitigations for that, but maybe that's part of your threat model. But I would say that the people that have that threat model, it's an exceedingly small percentage, of the world. And it's great that there's technologies like Tor, and we're actually a big financial supporter of Tor over the years. And actually, the Proton Foundation contributes quite a bit to Tor in terms of financial support, right? I think it's great those technologies exist, but unless you are in that small fraction of people with that specific threat model, something like Tor or these other more complicated technologies, it is not the best technical solution to the problem that you're actually trying to solve. So I think it's good to have a bit more security and be a bit more anonymous. It's good to use Tor, and there's use cases for that. But using that for all situations is, quite frankly, a little bit overkill, and probably not what is best for user, and even not what's best for the Tor network as well, right? If you just want to, be safe because you don't trust the hotel Wi-Fi, which you shouldn't, by the way, those things are, death traps, then you really have very little, let's say, advantage in, going to Tor as opposed to using a VPN. So this is kind of my view, right? It comes down really to a threat modeling.
Everything comes down to threat modeling. And I think that's one thing that probably frustrates most of us in the privacy space is how somebody looks at the most extreme case, or it's not even like it's on a single continuum. There's multiple axes to privacy and what might be your threat model. And I almost wish we almost need like a nutrition label kind of simplification of threat model labeling. So, because otherwise you're comparing apples and oranges when you're looking at some of these privacy products. Yeah.
And also, don't trust Apple's private relay, because, Apple is still going to be able to see the stuff, right? Apple has the operating system, so they know everything about you anyway. Apple's definition of privacy is very simple, right? Apple's definition of privacy is nobody can abuse your data except for us, right? And that's not privacy. So Apple has shown very clearly that, they believe in privacy when it's good for marketing and when it helps their bottom line, right? Which is, in this case, It helps their own advertising business by locking out Google and Facebook.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, at least they're not so far really, data is not what they make their money on. It's hardware mostly. And so we're kind of leaning heavily on that, but
yes, but they're not averse to making money from data, and they are making money from data at the expense of Google and, Facebook.
Right. All right. One more tricky one, and then I'll let you go. Signal was recently called out for not protecting the local encryption keys from other processes running on the computer. So basically, while Signal is often held up as the gold standard for secure messaging and end-to-end encryption, at the ends themselves, if either of the ends is compromised, then most people kind of assume that at that point it's kind of game over anyway. But the theory was here, I think, from Signal's response to this was, look, if there's malware running on your machine as a user, or certainly if it's running at root level or admin level on your computer, there's not a whole lot we could do to protect things anyway. First of all, do you buy that argument? And then second, I'm curious, how do you guys handle that if I'm running a desktop version of a Proton app? Are the encryption keys available to malware if I'm compromised?
Yeah, Signal is not wrong. If you are compromised, there is not a whole lot that encryption can do. So from that perspective, the goal should not be to completely lock down everything locally from every single local compromise, because that's impossible. Where I think the nuance in this debate, and I, of course, saw the controversy that was there, is it's not an absolute, right? You cannot say that, just because it's impossible to fully secure, we don't bother at all.
Right.
It's whether you bother or not should depend on how difficult it is to do it, because it's a question of ROI, right? Is it worth sacrificing, in this case, developer time plus potential user experience, downsides, to bring this additional level of security? Because it's a trade-off. And if you look at Signal's ultimate response in the end, there was probably some stuff on social media, some statements and things like that. But ultimately, Signal decided to patch the issue.
Yeah, right.
So that means that in the end, they did the right thing. Now, some people could say that they took too long to do the right thing, and that's always valid criticism.
Yeah, because this was found years ago, actually.
Yeah. So I think you can make the argument that it could have been done, earlier. But I would think also, better late than never, right? And I think it's okay for people in the community to try to put some pressure to get some of these things done, but that pressure also needs to be commensurate with the risk, right? And there were some press articles saying, Signal and WhatsApp have been compromised. It's not the case, right? It was blowing it out of proportion, and that's sensationalist bullshit that doesn't help anybody. So that's kind of my take. And what's Proton's position? Well, we, of course, are going to use the keychain and, encrypt the keys when we can, when it makes sense. And we do that whenever it is feasible. Not because our threat model demands that we do it, but because the additional effort to do it is not so high as to make the ROI for this exercise not worth it to provide a bit more security. But I'll say it out loud and everybody should know this. If your device is compromised, just because we have done that step, that's not going to save you, right? So, keep your devices secure. And at the end of the day, there's only so much we can do locally, but local device compromise, it was never part of our threat model, and it can't be part of our threat model, not until the day when we actually have our own operating system, right?
Right. And a lot of this stuff is controlled at the OS level. And I think it's interesting now that Apple and some others are coming out with more sandboxing kind of features and things that let even apps on the same machine not be able to talk to other apps on the machine or look at other apps' data. And I know that mobile's better than that currently than desktop, but a lot of that's starting to migrate to the desktop. So I think that's interesting. And, it's a work in progress, right? So, okay, last question. Here's your softball. What sorts of new features or products are in the pipeline? Sounds like you don't have anything major coming up because you just had this huge dump. What have you considered, I don't know, like a YouTube thing? That's the other thing that Google just has stranglehold on is uploading videos. Are there any other, what are your users demanding that you're paying most attention to for future products?
Well, there's always the subset of the community that is asking for new things, right? But I think there's also a very vocal minority that is now saying, focus on your current things, make them better, and deliver on the existing products. And the existing products have actually grown a bit in number just in the last month, right? So my view actually is we're going to be quite focused for the rest of the year. It's not like we stopped working on other products when we launch new things, right? It's separate teams, separate efforts, and things are going in parallel. It's a bit unfortunate that some of the other improvements that we've done on existing products are not going to land until this month or next month or the month after. So people maybe complain a bit more because it was out of order, right? But we are focusing on existing products quite a bit. We have quite a bit planned coming, just on the mail product, on the calendar product, and especially on the VPN as well. I think some of the announcements actually have already started to come out on the VPN side. So, no major product announcements, I would say, for the next for the next month or two, let's say, right? And definitely, hopefully, a lot of things on existing products that will make the community happy. But in the end, we are here to serve you. We're here to serve, all the users out there. So let us know on Reddit, on Twitter, on other social channels what you want. We don't have advertisers are backing us. We're not paid by advertisers. We don't have VCs. It's a nonprofit foundation. It now literally works for the people because the foundation is for the public good, right? So what you want, you tell us, and it is now our job legally to make it possible.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks for coming back to the show, Andy. It was good to talk to you. We had a lot to talk about, so thanks for coming back.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, and hope you're back again in the future to share some more insights.
Absolutely. So I thought that was a great interview, and I was glad that I had the opportunity to ask him some of these questions that I've had, and some of those around me in my privacy community have had as well, about some of these new features and some of the privacy aspects of those. So we all think of, Proton as a privacy company, and they are, of course, that. They are very privacy focused, as we've talked about today, but they're more than just a privacy company, and I think Andy was alluding to that today. And if you actually go and look at the Proton Foundation's main page, you will see that they've actually encompassed more than just privacy. In fact, it says on the page, our legally binding purpose is to further the advancement of privacy, freedom, and democracy around the world. While privacy obviously is a key part of all of those things and a key focus for the company, I think what we've learned and what we've heard today, certainly with things like Proton Scribe and Proton Wallet and some of these things that may not seem at first blush to be very privacy forward, that they are doing what they can. They have plans to do better on all counts and to make them as private as they can be, but acknowledging the fact that they are an existing force in the world, and that is where a lot of people are today. So meeting people where they are at and then trying to make that private, and then going from there. They're trying to make Bitcoin, for example, more accessible, as Andy said. And for a lot of people, that can be really important. I've seen cases in the past where Visa, MasterCard, and now PayPal in more recent years have cut businesses off, either at the behest of the country, like the United States or whatever the host country is. It says, we don't like these things, and we maybe can't directly put them out of business because they're maybe outside of our jurisdictional control, or maybe what they're doing is legal and we just don't like it. They can still lean heavily on the payment processors for those businesses and basically cut them off at the knees by cutting off their financial backing. With their current Proton Wallet offering, they are giving their users another method to pay for things, and not just Proton, but other things as well that can potentially bypass that sort of, financial censorship. It does sound like they want to add more privacy features, like maybe a mixing capability, maybe the CoinJoin type thing, and maybe even support other currencies like Monero that are much more privacy focused. But there are legal issues around those things, and for a company like Proton, they kind of have to pick their battles. So they are obviously keeping an eye on this, and we will be keeping an eye on them to see if they will be able to bring these features to us safely, legally, and in the future. It sounds to me like they're trying to do a more compromised path, and you can take issue with that. I personally am okay with it, mostly because I'm here to support the vast majority of people for which the products they're making are very good and certainly good enough for what they need. But yeah, are they going to cover every possible threat model? No, they're not. And as we've heard today, they're not pretending to. Couple updates since we've had this interview. Proton Wallet is currently waitlisted. I am on that list, so I have not been able to try it yet. I definitely want to, but I haven't been able to try it yet. And so I assume, therefore, if you tried it yourself, unless you got in early, you would also be put on a wait list. I'm sure they're trying to be very careful with how they roll this out. Anything having to do with Bitcoin and money and things like that, you want to make sure you get that right. So I understand that. So anyway, if you're interested, you might want to go ahead and get on that wait list. Also, and since we recorded this, Proton Scribe is now available for the Proton family and their new Proton Duo tiers. As Andy said in the interview prior to that, it was only for Proton Business, but is now available for family and Duo. Duo is basically a two-person family, and that's a new tier that they just recently added. So, if you want to give Proton Scribe a try, you don't have to be a Proton Business customer now. There are other ways to check that out. Now, if Proton Wallet is something you're interested in and want to learn more about, let me make two recommendations. First of all, go listen to the video or watch the video from TechLore, where Henry and Jonah talk about this. There's a link in the show notes that will jump you right to the part of their video where they talk about Proton Wallet. And Seth for Privacy, who we've had on the show before, and I've been on his show before, also interviewed Andy Yen, and he got into much more technical detail about some of these privacy questions. So if you want to learn more, there's a link to that interview in the show notes as well. And by the way, I should probably call out some of the other sites and people that I follow and respect more often, because it's good to spread the word and spread the love. So check out TechLore, check out Privacy Guides, check out the New Oil, Surveillance Report podcast, Seth for Privacy's podcast called the Opt Out Podcast. These guys are all really good people and they're doing great work. So be sure to check that stuff out. And of course, there are some links in the show notes. All right. So I just did a really fun interview with Space Rogue, aka Chris Thomas, who's part of the classic hacker group, The Loft. He wrote a whole book on that subject, which we talked about a lot more hacker history stuff. That was a great interview. That will be coming up soon. I'll also be recording interviews very soon with a representative from Tuda, previously called Tutanota, one of the other secure email companies. We're going to be talking about the advent of quantum computing and the risks it poses for potentially cracking modern encrypted communications. Is it overblown? How does that work? What are we doing about it? So we're going to get into all that with him. And then I'm going to be talking to the two women that published the TunnelVision VPN vulnerability. And of course, we will be talking about TunnelVision itself and how that worked. But we're also going to be talking about VPNs more generally and how people aren't really using them right. Or maybe the other way to put that is they're really not meant to address the types of things that people are trying to use them for. And there's actually a lot of VPN related things that I want to talk to them about. So that will be a very interesting discussion. And some other ones are in the pipeline. Of course, my interview with Bruce Schneier and several others are coming up. So a lot of great content coming your way. Be sure to subscribe and then you won't miss any of that. And for next week's news show, we'll have the regular news, but for sure I'll be talking about the arrest of Telegram CEO Pavel Durov and all the implications around that. Surprise, surprise, there are subtleties to this story that aren't really getting enough attention in the mainstream reporting. So we'll talk about that next week. So one more thing, I promised I'd give you an update on the crowdsourcing campaign. Basically, here's what I'm trying to put together. I want to get your help in finding creative ways for me to reach a bigger audience, for me to, I hate the term, but basically market the podcast and the blog and the newsletter and the book and things like that. We had our book surge campaign about a month ago, which was great. And I want to do another one for the podcast and maybe another one for the blog and the newsletter, but between now and the end of the year. I think the podcast campaign would make most sense to do around the 400th episode, which is coming up quickly. That'll be right around Halloween, the last week of October, when I'll be interviewing Bruce Schneier. So I'm going to have this put together before then, but I'm just to kind of put a bug in your brain to start thinking about this, I'm going to ask you guys to help me come up with some very interesting and creative ways to try to reach more people. A lot of that's going to be, obviously there's things about social media that I could be doing, and I'll be open to ideas on that. But I really kind of want to almost have a contest around this and say, if you can come up with some interesting way for me to do it that I have not heard of before, because there's a lot of dumb marketing crap out there. Most of it's about SEO and gaming the system and all that. I don't want to do that. I want this to be real. I want this to be organic. I hate that word because, again, it's a marketing term that just kind of makes me cringe a little bit. But in the truest sense of that term, I want this to be real. So I want to find real ways to reach people who could be interested and could benefit from this content for the kind of stuff I'm doing. So I am going to be reaching out to you guys to see if you can help me come up with some great ways to do that. So the details of that will be worked out, but that is the kind of thing that's going to be coming. So stay tuned. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.